Chris Carter here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. Reports now surfacing the Steelers are doing in-person interviews with Brian Flores and Mike McCarthy, two older coaches. We'll talk about what could be behind that, as well as could something of that impact Aaron Rodgers maybe coming back for another season. That and a harder look at offensive and defensive coaching assistants that have ascended to the head coaching spot right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. A reminder, the Locked On Steelers podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is now the #1 sports podcasting network in the world. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is officially in playoff mode every game day during the NFL playoffs. FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, Steelers fans, it was an exciting weekend in the playoff. We got to talk about the Steelers because the coaching search is still on. They're making moves, and we did get from my colleague Jerry Dulac at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. He initially reported that the Steelers are planning to talk to former Packers and Cowboys coach Mike McCarthy. Of course, he has personal ties to the area, and they have scheduled an in-person video also with Brian Flores. Now, there was some clarification here that needed to be put out, because initially he said they were having a second in-person interview with Brian Flores, and so a lot of people thought, oh, that means they're zeroing in on Brian Flores. And that kind of changed a little bit, because a little bit after that, Jerry clarified they're meeting with Mike McCarthy and Brian Flores in person, partially because they see them not needing virtual interviews, because the team already has familiarity with each candidate. Now, part of this also goes into the Steelers kind of just expanding their, delving into the next stage of their search, getting some in-person interviews with these guys. And again, Brian Flores, he's been with the team. They know who he is. Mike McCarthy, he grew up in Greenfield. He's from Pittsburgh. There's obvious connections there. But with the Rams winning over the Bears, and what was a spectacular playoff weekend again in the NFL, it looks like the Steelers won't be able to bring in either Chris Shula or Nate Scheelhaase in person for at least another week. The earliest they can do is probably Monday after the conference championship games, which I believe is the 26th. So the Steelers search might be taking a bit longer there, but there are reasonable questions. Could the Steelers be looking harder at Brian Flores and Mike McCarthy? Now, I have a different theory on Mike McCarthy. Now, I thought there was a really good theory posted by our colleague Alan Saunders, from SteelersNow.com. He's always here on the Tuesday episode. We hope I have him on tomorrow's episode. But he posted an interesting theory where maybe Mike McCarthy is a sounding board. And we'll talk about this more with him tomorrow. But I believe what he's saying there is the Steelers are going to try to see, are going to be talking to all these coaches. Mike McCarthy can be a guy. He's a guy who's won a Super Bowl. He's coached multiple successful teams that have gotten to the playoffs, won divisions. And he has experience working with franchise quarterbacks. And maybe they're trying to interview him as part of their process to kind of gauge everyone else. And I think that could be what they're going for there. That does seem like a theory. I have another theory to that. But I want to focus back on Brian Flores, because Mike McCarthy, this one sort of came out of the blue, which does tell me there's something else afoot there. But Brian Flores is different. He was noted from the start of this process that the Steelers were interested in him. And I kind of noted the Steelers might be looking at him after the season. Now, granted, I thought that might be more of a defensive coordinator role. He making an adjacent role to come under Mike Tomlin as a defensive coordinator. Remember, he was brought in as a defensive consultant because he came in during the first year of Terrell Austin's tenure as the Steelers defensive coordinator. And it was a success. Both of them, had a good time. And Brian Flores, many thought because he was suing the NFL that maybe he was done. Maybe no team would give him a call. Maybe he was, done coaching in the NFL. after his stint with the Dolphins. Steelers brought him in, and people remembered, wait a minute, that guy is a pretty good defensive mind. And then he gets the job at the Vikings, and that Vikings defense was pretty tough, even with not all the best personnel sometimes. So I don't. But here's the thing: I don't think the Steelers necessarily are zeroing in or making Brian Flores the primary target just yet. Maybe that's what happens. But again, and we'll dive more into this as every day, but I think the priority here is the Steelers want a great leader. That's what they want in a head coach. Brian Flores, he's a guy that knows how to command a room. He knows how, when he has a direction, he targets it. And I think he does a good job as far as trying to get people on this, headed towards his vision. Even when, there's struggles to try to get it there. You go over some of his years when he was with the Dolphins, and he was able to sort of, stabilize things. His first year in 2019, they were 5-11, and people wanted to leave. In fact, that's how the Steelers got Minkah Fitzpatrick. He wanted to be traded. He gets traded to the Steelers in 2019. But the next 2 years, they were 10-6 in 2020 and 9-8 in 2021. Nothing spectacular there. But the Dolphins were notably rebuilding, and he was also anti-Tua, which is what ended up, making him leave, and he wouldn't tank and do some of the things that the Dolphins wanted him to do that will kind of break a few rules there. But I like Brian Flores. I think he's done a good job as a defensive coordinator. I think he is a good coach. But I still think that the Steelers are looking for right now, or should be looking for, the young future that does get them into the innovative side of things, that does get them tapped into a new coach with a fresh voice that comes in and addresses things. Now, the one thing about Brian Flores is that he can be a fresh voice in a sense that he's been in the room for years ago. Not everyone, but in fact, most guys on the team probably weren't around when he was there, save for like Cam Hayward, TJ Watt, and a few other guys. But when you look at what I think what he'll bring to the table, I think he'll be able to push things. He'll be familiar with being a head coach. There'll be less figuring those things out. But I think the Steelers are trying to look to see what other coaches can they bring in, and what kind of systems can they bring with them, or what kind of assistants can they bring with them. And I think that continues to point to them wanting to be patient for Chris Shula, because again, they won't be able to talk to him in person until after the conference championship weekend. Now that the Rams are in the conference championship, because our last episode, we ended talking about the Steelers potentially cleaning house. And, when we say cleaning house, meaning the entire coaching staff could be gone. Now, I doubt that fully happens, because as we said, I think the Steelers do appreciate their assistants, like, certain assistants like Denzel Martin, Eddie Faulkner, Carl Dunbar, Fredo, the tight ends. There's so many. I think there's guys that have done that you could say have done a good job, but the Steelers granted them the opportunity to go seek other jobs, because they said that they were only going to keep guys that the head coach that they hired agreed to. And I think part of that is to give that head coach deference to say, hey, we're going to give you the space to pick your staff, to figure out who you want with you and what kind of tone you want to set when you get here. And I think that's fine. I think it would behoove the coach to have the opportunity to have guys that are connected with the players and help him bridge some gaps where there might be some differences, because that always happens. But it's up to that head coach to choose what they want. And, Brian Flores will bring some guys that he's associated with, but I think you're looking at it, guys like Jeff Hafley of the Packers, guys like Chris Shula of the Rams. There's potential to bring guys in that are going to be different voices and different directions that the Steelers are trying to head in starting their era without Mike Tomlin, and trying to give things a shot. Now, there's also a chance that Brian Flores gets brought in because they kind of want to, they recognize that, like, hey, we still have a good core here that's developing. Maybe he's the closest thing that we can get to Mike Tomlin right now. Based off of being a veteran head coach who's had head coaching experience, who's defensive minded and will push his team and demand his team and demand high things of his team. Maybe that's along the line, but I look at the opportunities with the other coaches that they brought in, Anthony Weaver, just other guys that can come in and establish a new voice, being younger guys, either early 40s or late 30s. I think that's still the thing that I'm looking at the Steelers to do here. It just makes the most sense. And again, I think there's something else behind Mike McCarthy, but I want to discuss that in the next segment because I wonder if there's a break glass in case of emergency situation that they're doing with Mike McCarthy. I do like the soundboard theory that Allen had, but I want to talk about how that plays into what the Steelers could be planning as part of their current trajectory. That's going to be next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate QB. The draft picks positions are set, and so many teams are looking for their franchise quarterback. If you've ever wished to become a pro QB, getting drafted first overall by the Steelers, well, now you can. There's a mobile game just for you called Ultimate QB Football Legend. In this game, you step into the cleats of a number one draft pick quarterback, and it's your job to lead your team to greatness. You can help turn a failing franchise into a dynasty. This is the number one QB career mode game on mobile app stores, and it introduces the most realistic environment with full career control, sign contracts, train and upgrade yourself, build chemistry, and evolve your teammates, give input to your GM on roster moves, play the actual games in 2D, and rise through the ranks to become a pro football legend. You'll deal with the ups and downs of a QB career, from rookie nerves to playoff drama, and every choice shapes your journey. Ultimate QB is totally free to play, has no ads, works 100% offline, perfect for when you want to sneak in a quick game or two on the go. Just head over to ultimate-qb.com. That's ultimate-qb.com, or search for Ultimate QB in your app store. And we've got something special for you, just for you guys. Use the promo code LOCKEDON, all caps, that in the game store, and you'll get a free boost at the start of your career. Ultimate QB, football legend QB1, it's your legacy. We're also brought to you by Prize Picks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to stay locked into every moment than with Prize Picks, the daily fantasy app, where it always feels good to be right. With football season coming down to its final stretch, now's the perfect time to close it out strong. Prize Picks makes watching the game even more exciting by letting you build simple lineups around player projections, no drafts, no waiting, just football action all the way through the playoffs. Prize Picks is incredibly easy to get started. Pick two or more players, choose more or less on their projections, and watch them go. It makes watching games way more engaging, especially during the playoffs and the big game. Favorite feature of mine, early payouts. It will let you cash out if a player gets off to a hot start. The new social feed makes it fun to follow friends, share lineups, and get inspiration from each other. The early payout feature is a great bonus, so get started today by downloading the Prize Picks app. Use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Back here on your Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show here. I like Allen's theory that Mike McCarthy could be a sounding board to learn what the Steelers need to be prepared to hear, and get ready for this coaching search as they start to do other interviews and they turn to the in-person interviews. And I think that's a decent theory. But what about this theory? Aaron Rodgers claimed that he was coming to play in Pittsburgh because he wanted to play for Mike Tomlin. It was a big feature for him. It was a big fact that he thought, hey, if I'm going to play for anybody, I'm going to play for that guy. And by all accounts, from all his comments that he made all season to the amazing story by Mike DeFabo, where he got insight on how Mike Tomlin's final meeting with the team went, and how Aaron Rodgers was crying and saying, "I'm sorry" to Mike Tomlin as Mike Tomlin was leaving the room. All things into account, Aaron Rodgers truly appreciated his time with Mike Tomlin, and that was a big reason. And now with Mike Tomlin gone, kind of puts the Steelers in a position where you could probably not expect him to come back. Now, Steelers don't necessarily have to go the way of expecting Aaron Rodgers back, but I thought he had a decent year. He was pretty solid. He was a good leader for the locker room, and I thought he did good things. And as I said all along, there were several parameters that the Steelers needed to make sure that Aaron Rodgers would want to come back. One, they needed to have the same coaching staff. That ain't happening. Arthur Smith's interviewing with so many other teams. Not only is Mike Tomlin gone, you can pretty much bet that Arthur Smith and Terrell Austin are going to be gone. Not that Terrell Austin impacts things on the Aaron Rodgers side, but you get my point. 2, they needed to go a bit further in the playoffs. I thought if they made the divisional round, maybe that would be something. Maybe Aaron could be like, there's something here. I could come back, play for Mike one more time, and we'll give it another go. Maybe they'll get me one more playmaker at the wide receiver position. Thought something like that could happen, and that did. Neither of those things happened. What if the Steelers interviewing Mike McCarthy is a backup plan for if they don't land Chris Shula or any of these other guys that they think are their real primary targets? Maybe they bring in a guy like Mike McCarthy who has experience and, of course, has a lot of experience with coaching Aaron Rodgers. And maybe that could be the factor that keeps Aaron Rodgers for one more year. Now, I know some people are probably screaming, no, I don't want Aaron Rodgers for another year. I want a young quarterback. My goodness. I hear you. But to me, I think the Steelers are kind of signaling right now with the way they've handled things. They know this isn't the year for the NFL draft to draft a quarterback in the NFL. Right now, the 2 consensus first-round picks between everybody are Fernando Mendoza and Ty Simpson. And frankly, I'm not a big Ty Simpson guy. So to me, it's primarily just Fernando Mendoza. And because of that, they're probably not going to get him unless they trade up a mint to get him. And that makes me think they're going to need another bridge. Now, here's the thing. The guy that everyone's going to want to get, and I think would be a good get, is Malik Willis. But because Malik Willis is a guy that people are going to want to get, there's going to be competition. There's going to be a bidding war. And with bidding wars, then you start to wonder how much of your cap space do you want to sacrifice for a guy, Malik Willis, that, maybe that could work. Maybe Malik Willis could be a guy for the long term, maybe your answer. But I tend to think that Malik Willis, if he's brought to Pittsburgh, he's another guy that's in the bridge conversation to get you to the 2027 draft. And, I think you don't want to pay him, some absorbent amount of money to be that guy. Because again, he's a backup quarterback who has done solidly, and you're thinking, okay, he's athletic. He's made some big plays. He makes some nice throws. He's a veteran now. He's learned. Let's bring him into the fold. In 2026 right now, the Steelers have about $37.9 million in cap space per overthecap.com. That could probably be quickly added to is that if they cut Jonnu Smith, that saves another $7 million. Then they're at like $44-ish million. There's other guys that could probably move around contract-wise and figure some things out that make it easier on them to go get some guys this upcoming season. And so they probably could afford Malik Willis. But if he ramps up a $20 million tag, as far as a per-year basis because of how many teams want him in this free agency period, that cuts almost half of what you're going to have in free agency. And I think this team needs to add other pieces. So it could be that the Steelers are preparing for, maybe we just bring back Aaron, give it one more go with him, and then we take our shot at the franchise quarterback in next year's draft, and we go with that. And if you're going to entice to bring back Aaron, maybe bring in someone else that he's familiar with and that he liked playing for, and that's Mike McCarthy. And yeah, Mike McCarthy and Aaron Rodgers, they definitely had their differences at times over their long tenure together in Green Bay, but they won a Super Bowl together, beating the Steelers in the 2010-2011 season. They made the playoffs, every year from 2009 to 2016, rather remarkable. McCarthy eventually gets fired from Green Bay, but, there's been pictures of, even just this last offseason of Rodgers hanging out with McCarthy on the beach, by his home. So, there could be something there. There could be Mike McCarthy wanting to come back to Pittsburgh. He just had a stint in Dallas where he started his time with a 6-10 year in 2020. Had 3 straight 12-5 seasons where they were able to make the playoffs. They only won 1 playoff game during that stretch. And then he went 7-10 last year in 2024 before getting fired. He hasn't gone back to coaching yet. But maybe that's what this is. I think that there's a chance that Mike McCarthy is, hey guys, we're not going to win bidding wars for Malik Willis or other veteran quarterbacks that we want to take a shot at. Let's just ride it out with Aaron Rodgers one more time. Let's help him. Let's see if he can help develop, some of this, probably the young receiver that they're going to draft really high in this upcoming class. and we'll keep things moving along. And then in 2027, then we get aggressive. We trade up. We go get the guy we think is the franchise quarterback of the future. I could see something like that happening. But again, I think what the Steelers are doing, and this is something that I think they do well, is they present themselves with several different options. They don't lock themselves into one direction. They try to present themselves with multiple doors to choose based off of how things could play out that are beyond their control. So that's just me. I feel like that's a possibility. But again, it's going to depend on how a few things play out. I still think the priority should be to find a young coach who is going to who's going to be a leader, who's going to be able to set a tone and can be a long-time coach the way that Mike Tomlin was, Bill Cowher was, and that Chuck Noll was. I think they should still stick to their formula. But I could see if for the sake of bringing in a veteran head coach who can kind of pick things up where Mike Tomlin left off, keep things competitive and have a connection with Aaron Rodgers, maybe there could be something there that the Steelers cling on to. And, at least maybe Mike McCarthy isn't the long-term coach. He's the first Steelers temporary coach in a long time. So a lot to consider there, but I think they're keeping that in their back pocket because the team definitely said that, Art Rooney acknowledged in the Wednesday press conference last week that, they, without Mike, the chances to bring back Aaron are lower, but they're not nil. And I think that this might be a ploy to see, can we get Aaron Rodgers to want to come back if we bring this guy in? Just a theory there for a temporary fix as they try to stay competitive in 2026 and moving forward. But I want to go back to the conversation of offensive versus defensive coaches, and specifically and how that could apply to the Steelers search. Now, as you guys know, I think it's not about offense. It's not about defense. It's about leadership. But I went and did some numbers over the past 5 years of coaching hiring cycles and what it's been like and what's the success been for those groups on offensive and defensive background coaches. We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I remind you, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The conference championship round is here, and FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. Every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action, because right now, the NFL playoff game days, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them inside the app. Each game day, you'll see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts you can apply to the bets that you like the most. Open your profit boost pack first thing on game day and see what boosts you want to apply. The boosts give you more juice on the bets and you already like, instead of forcing you to bet something new. Every play feels bigger, and the boosts make your bets feel that way too. You make your picks, then apply your profit boosts to go after even bigger payouts while the playoffs get rolling. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. Only on FanDuel. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our episode here today. I want to go over some numbers that you'll be able to find in a story I wrote that's in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. The thing here that I did over the past week or so, I was trying to figure out a way to scale it. I wanted to look at the numbers of who got hired. I was trying to find, there's no easy database of just who gets hired year by year in the NFL coach. So I had to kind of construct it myself and then comb over the numbers and then just kind of dwell on them for a little bit. But one thing I found when looking at the hiring of defensive versus offensive coaches, and I want to talk about this more with other people too on this show, when I looked at the numbers, I went back over the last 5 years of coaching cycles. And one thing I saw is something I often talk about this show, and it's the swinging back and forth of cycles. Once one thing goes one direction, it's going to come back around in the other in the NFL. I've talked about this before when we've talked about like, hey, a lot of defenses have adapted their personnel to be good against quick passing games. They've gotten smaller, quicker linebackers, faster guys in space. They've changed out size for speed. And so offenses then said, okay, we're going to get better at running the football. And you saw teams like the Eagles, the Ravens, the Bills, all these teams really good at running the football, getting, stronger players that can do that. And so now defenses are getting stronger up front. And so, it's always a trend for, someone finds a trend, other teams tack onto the trend, and then people have to find the trend that's going to counter the old trend. And I think that could be what's happening when it comes to head coaching hires. We still got to see how this year plays out. But when I was looking at who coached, which coaches had offensive backgrounds, when I say offensive backgrounds, meaning they were an NFL assistant coach with offensive responsibilities, whether they were position coach or offensive coordinator. And similarly, if they were defensive position coach, they were, a defensive position coach, or they were a defensive coordinator. And I noticed almost when you go back through 2021 through 2023, so the first 3 years that I looked at of coaching hires, there were 22 head coaches hired. 15 of them were offensive background head coaching hires. That's more than double the 7 defensive head coaching hires during that span, showing, hey, a lot of people are on board with get offense. Get the young offensive-minded guru who's going to change everything. He's going to lock in with the guy we think is the franchise quarterback. That's the future. It is here now, and we're happy to embrace it. But then I looked at the next 2 years, the most recent 2 years, 2024 and 2025, and I think you're starting to see that swing back that I'm talking about, that cycle where people are going this way, now it's coming back around. And you can see in the past 2 years of hiring cycles, there have been 12 head coaches hired. 7 of them are defensive specialized coaches. Now, again, that's not the complete flip around. It's not 15 of 22, which is more than doubling more than it's more than double what the defensive coaches were hired during that span. But 7 out of 12 means that they had 7 defensive. There were 7 defensive coaches hired in the last year versus 5 offensive coaches. It's a sign that maybe that cycle is at least slowing down. And look, there could also just be the possibility that it's just like, hey, it just matters who's available each year. But when I looked at it, I was like, and then even the first 2 hires of this year, John Harbaugh to the Giants and Kevin Stefanski to the Falcons. One defensive in Harbaugh, one offensive in Stefanski. It seems like it's becoming more and more even when it comes to these types of coaches in how they're being hired. And I think part of it is, again, them using I think part of it is just teams adjusting to what's happening in the trends. So then I looked at, okay, well, out of all these coaches that have had stuff, which are the most successful? Now, I looked at 35 different head coaches who were hired between 2021 and 2025. The only one who's won a Super Bowl of that crew so far is Nick Sirianni. Now, he can get joined by Mike Vrabel's in his first year coaching the Patriots. Ben Johnson's out now because they lost to the Rams, but D'Amico Ryans is out as well. But Sean Payton is in his 3rd year with the Broncos. So there's 2 guys that could join him as far as guys of this pool that are in the conference championship. Also, Mike McDonald, in that picture as well as a 2nd-year head coach. But looking at how things have played out, all those coaches that I named that are currently up for the running to try to be the 2nd and maybe also 3rd head coaches who've either won a Super Bowl or at least a conference title since 2021, since being hired in 2021 or sooner. That's an interesting split of who is left, because Mike McDonald has a defensive background as a head coach, as does Mike Vrabel. But on the flip side, you got Sean McVay, who's offensive minded, but he's also not from this era. He's a little bit older with the Rams. I think he came in 2017. But then on the flip side, you also have Sean Payton, who was hired in 2023 by the Broncos. And again, he's much older coach too. But you have a dead split down the middle of offensive and defensive. Same thing happens for all the 8 teams in the divisional round of the playoffs. 4 teams were defensive, 4 teams were offense. As far as head coaches and how they were brought in: Mike McDonald, Sean McDermott, D'Amico Ryans, Mike Vrabel, 4 defensive minded head coaches with defensive backgrounds. Ben Johnson, Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, and Sean Payton, 4 guys with offensive backgrounds. And then when I kept looking through, I counted which teams made the playoffs, which teams were able to win their division, which teams were one and had a coach that went one and done, and compared it, offensive versus defenses, and a lot of them, slightly edged a little bit of offense in those stats because a lot of the offensive, there were more offensive coaches being hired, during the period from 2021 to 2023. So naturally, in those, coaches hired from that 3 years have had more time to establish their roster, build themselves out, and get more bites at the apple or opportunities to strike. But when I looked at at it, I was like, these aren't super demonstrative numbers. There's no serious push right now that says that offensive or defensive coaches are the bottom line, that you got to get one or the other, and that's the only way to win in the NFL. It's not. I don't think it's a necessary thing. It's what we said last week, and it goes back down to not narrowing the box, as Art Rooney said. And I want you again to read. I want to read you these quotes from Art Rooney's press conference when asked about going one way or the other, offensive or defense. He said, "For now, I don't want to put any real parameters around it being the playoff search." He said, "We're going to be an open book in terms of who we look for and the list that we build. Can I sign up for another Chuck Noll or another Bill Cowher, another Mike Tomlin? Sure. Somebody that we feel fits the mold would be great. But for now, we're not going to narrow the box too much." He also went on to say there are a lot of things that go into being a successful head coach. Number one, really, I think in my mind, is leadership, and really trusting that this person can stand up in front of your team day in and day out and hold their attention and have them motivated to do what they do. That's the most important. Again, it boils down to leadership. Now, if they have an offensive background and they can create the offense for the quarterback and attract the right quarterback, and great, awesome. But it won't matter if you have the best offensive guru in the world who can draw up the best plays and maybe be cool to quarterback, if they can't connect with the rest of their team. If they're a quarterback whisperer, that's fine, but there's specific positions for quarterback whisperers, and sometimes best quarterback whisperers aren't also the best head coaches. And there's opportunities there, I think, for the Steelers to find out who's who in this coaching search. But again, the priorities for me, if I'm the Steelers, is I'm looking for leaders. I'm looking for the same kind of leaders that I've been building my franchise, that have been winning me Super Bowls since 1969. Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, Mike Tomlin, all leaders of men, all guys who were charismatic, people got behind, people wanted to fight for, and ultimately brought championship success to Pittsburgh. So whenever someone starts going over offensive and defenses, go over the numbers and check out my piece in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. It should be up by the time that you're seeing this, or at least by early Monday morning. I think that you look at that, and then you can say, okay, yeah, I don't think that it has to be one way or the other. It's just going to be about when you get behind those closed doors. How do these guys command a room? Who respects these guys? How do they handle adversity? How do they get guys to rise to the challenge? Those could be the things that Art Rooney and Omar Khan have to decide in the background as they figure out who they want to make the Steelers' next head coach. And that I think, again, I can't prioritize enough. That stuff is a lot more important than numbers on a sheet that say, oh, this group of coaches is better than this group of coaches for sure, and because they just happen to because I like them, they're innovative on offense and not as innovative on defense. That's ridiculous. All these guys are innovative. That's how they're still alive in this business. And I think that the Steelers, as they push forward and they continue their search, they need to prioritize being a team that gets that leader, that culture guy that's going to bring in other people with him and help make the Steelers still a competitive team this year, and eventually start pushing them back into the direction of maybe being a bigger competitive team in the playoffs. That's all we have for here today on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thanks so much for joining us here on your favorite podcasting app or on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. A reminder, you can read my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, including my more in-depth look at the past 5 years of coaching hires and where they are and what it tells us. And a lot of it tells us that the Steelers prioritizing being able to get a leader over offensive or defensive. That's the bottom line. But again, read that in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette by going to post-gazette.com. And again, you can find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Thanks again for tuning in to the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thanks again for checking out the work here. You can also check out my appearance on the Final Word for WPXI. It should be up on WPXI.com. I appeared there Sunday night as the host. But stay tuned because we got a lot more coming your way when it comes to the Pittsburgh Steelers. This coaching search isn't over. I don't think it's going to be over this week, based off of them not being able to get in person with Chris Shula and Nate Shieldhaas. But could there be other moves get made? We'll find out. Keep it here with the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, wherever you get social medias. My handle's @Carter Critiques. I'll see you again real soon here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.